I am most encouraged that our part of the industry on this side of the pond, as they call it, is trying to be proactive, not reactive, not waiting for our own version of this tragedy to occur before we do something, which frankly is often the spur for change.
It's really on them to interpret the law and make the final determination as the responsible designer of record. And I can't blame them for saying just go brick, because it's scary to make a mistake on this when there isn't much to fall back on.
And that's, I don't know that that's about the scruples of the manufacturer. I think it's saying this is what New York City is requiring now, so let's go with what they're requiring, right?
Here we are for the next installment, and we have two repeat guests on a follow-up to the prior podcast on a very interesting topic, and we brought a subject matter expert on to really dive deeper, Dan Popadynec. So very excited to have you on, Dan. And what we're going to really dig into is some of the new code requirements around fire blocking, fire safing, and how it applies to specifically the facade area. So let's give Dan a chance to introduce himself, who the firm he represents, and also his focus area specifically in this one area.
Thank you, Adrian. My name is Dan Popadynec, and I am a senior principal and director of building envelope here at Socotec, which, for those who aren't familiar, Socotec is the rebranded name of Vidars and previously Israel Berg and Associates. I'm an engineer by background. I've been with the firm 20 years, and I have 25 years of experience focused specifically on facades and new construction facades. The reason I'm, on this call today is a side involvement with the Department of Buildings in New York City with code development. I am the current chair of the Construction Requirements and Materials Committee, which reviews 11 chapters and appendices of the code. And we are planning for the next code cycle, which will be roughly the end of the decade. I'm not going to promise on the timeline on that, but I was previously involved with code cycles dating back to about 2011, which created the 2014 building code. And I guess the one we're going to speak more about, the 2022 New York City building code.
So this, I guess just for context, this specifically applies to New York City, all 5 boroughs in New York City, not relating to International Building Code or anywhere outside of the 5 boroughs.
Well,
Is
not
that a
yet.
correct statement?
Well, so far, yes, but we'll see how international building codes and other local building codes are going to evolve over time and see where that goes.
Okay, so maybe Steve, we'll have you chime in here on the hot topic at hand and what you're seeing in New York City, and maybe some of the confusion in the market and what's been recently enacted or implemented and where that's stirring from.
Yeah, I mean, so this is just, to give a little background, this is how Dan and I met, actually, because I was sort of chasing him down on things that I thought that the folks that were presenting for the city got wrong, and some of the confusion in language. And he was nice enough to actually watch my presentation I put online. And so when we finally spoke, he was like, good presentation, but I disagree with sort of some of the stuff that you have in there, which was, I think, sort of a great way to start out. But and the changes in the code affect, I put it, just the fire blocking changes, right? There's a whole bunch of changes that happened last time, but just the fire blocking for facades affected like 113 sections, right? That was my count when I added it up. So this is this is pretty vast. I think for me, there's some just core issues, right? We can get into a whole bunch of things. This, opaque facades is my life, right? It's the only thing I've ever done. It's the exterior wall and rain screen is the only thing I've done. So I get deep into this, right? And this affects me on every level, and every little thing that happens here affects me. So so I might have a little bit sort of more exposure to some of the smaller changes in the code. But I think just at a basic level, there's a couple major issues with the language. One of them has to do with the fact that you really can't add the type of fire blocking that's prescribed in the code to a wall assembly, a ventilated wall assembly, and still have ventilation and drainage. And that's 50 to 70% of what's being specified today is those ventilated wall assemblies in your opaque area, right? And so we just don't have any acceptable material. Now we're trying to get some materials through, but any acceptable material for that. And I think the bigger issue for me is some of the language around having to test with an FPA 285 and the fire blocking, because I think that actually makes us less safe unintentionally. And I think those are, for me, the two biggest things is that the code changes weren't intended, I think, to eliminate rain screen, but effectively they do. And maybe we start there and then move into what I think is the more salacious issue, which is the way that we've required the testing to happen, we're actually having, I think, more risky materials get through.
So what I want to ask Dan is, how is all of this being enforced at the moment? Is this part of the special inspection requirement around fire safing sign off? Because Eliot and I talk all the time about some international building codes that aren't being enforced. And so does the added level of enforcement with special inspection make this a more scrutinous topic at the moment in New York City?
The answer is yes. First of all, on permit application, the identification that the exterior wall contains combustible materials must be done, and certain requirements in that drawing package for permit must be included. Secondly, is the enforcement is through the special inspection process. For those who aren't familiar, New York City has a pretty stringent special inspection process, of which exterior walls, curtain walls, and veneers are included as a category of special inspection that require a sign up by a third-party engineer for the building to be completed, certificate of occupancy. And when that trigger is made in the permit drawings that the exterior walls contain combustible materials, a new category of special inspection, actually a revised category of special inspection, is invoked on that project. It used to be called EIFS special inspection. It's all combustible materials and exterior wall inspections. As for how it's being enforced, it is still a work in progress. We have seen quite a substantial slowdown in new construction in New York City in the last 2 years, unrelated to this topic, more related to the general economy. Do you mind if I speak a little bit about Stephen's comment about this killing ventilated facades?
Of course.
Yes.
If I paraphrase that line a bit, I apologize, Stephen, if that wasn't exactly what you said. It puts into a ventilated facade system requirements to contain and compartmentalize smoke and fire within the cavities, meaning that we are not going to have a 40-story tall cavity with combustible materials in it, and that the ventilation has to occur in certain compartments. When the fire blocking is used as the border material for those compartments, I still believe it's possible to achieve a ventilated facade in all principles, but it has challenges. The code is explicit on having the fire blocking at slab level. That is challenging on projects where naturally the breaks in the facade occur not at the bottom or through the slab. Example. Around windows, I don't think that's a particularly large challenge. The building code says that you have to fire block around windows. And frankly, I don't think that is a large lift for most of my clients. It just means that the right materials have to be around the perimeter of the window as it faces the cavity. That's the main challenges on that.
I guess that's the big question, is how do you detail that and allow for drainage and ventilation in those areas? That's and I don't know of a way to do that with the materials prescribed.
Well, let's be clear about the materials prescribed. The building code did on one of those. How many sections you said got changed?
113.
One of those 113 was to allow additional materials as fire blocking. Therefore, they're not trying to limit the commissioner, right? And so the idea there is the industry can respond with and prove to Department of Buildings, the authority having jurisdiction, that its materials act in that function as a fire blocking material, and therefore are not limited to the previous 7 items that were characterized as fire blocking.
When was this enacted, the code change?
November 23, right?
Yep.
When the local law 15 for bird-friendly glass came out, I think it was confusing for many, especially because there was such a limited supply chain and available offerings for facade consultants and to recommend for architects to select from. And so when the code was enacted and suddenly it was affecting every single building, it caused a little bit of a stir. Do you see that type of impact with this code change, or a lot of people are just unaware of it?
I think the third option is that people are pivoting away from combustible materials within their exterior wall when they have the option to do so. Even firms, architectural firms I've seen, they understand the code as a bare minimum requirement. And they, due to not just these code changes, but the underlying tragedy that happened in the UK, which was really the motivation behind a lot of these discussions, made firms discuss their liabilities, what is appropriate design, and how to go forward in that respect. And where possible, I was unofficially polling some of my partners here, and many of our projects have pivoted away from combustible materials. For example, just one simple example, we see a lot of exterior cladding system based on finished aluminum panels that come in two basic varieties, composite and plate. The move from composite to plate would eliminate that particular component of combustible material. And so that's, with all else being considered, I'm not saying it's the same material, same formability, same cost, but from the criteria of avoiding the situation of having to deal with these new code requirements, many clients are seriously looking at, or if not selecting, materials that avoid this whole issue.
So is
And, yeah, I would
composite
agree with
material with a fire-rated core acceptable?
No, it is a combustible material, therefore these code requirements apply. Even with the FR core, it is still combustible, therefore these requirements still apply. And we've seen, by the way, this is a good pivot onto the NFPA 285 testing. The Department of Buildings made pretty clear in a memo that previously tested assemblies that were tested without fire blocking are needed to be tested with fire blocking. And frankly, testing NFPA 285 is not an easy process. Stephen is pretty, and Eliot, you're pretty versed in that. It's not quick. It's not necessarily inexpensive. And but we've seen a couple of manufacturers go the route of retesting their systems with the fire blocking at the prescribed requirements.
And then once they do the testing, what's the process? Are they submitting it to OTCR? Is there an acceptance process?
No, it's actually what I've seen happen is with an NFPA 285 test, including fire blocking, the architect selects that system as a basis of design, okay, and puts those documents, embeds those documents into the architectural sheets. Not the entire NFPA 285 report, that would take too many, but the cover sheets, relevant details. And through the process of bidding, hopefully, maybe that system is selected, the BOD system is selected based on design system, or an alternative that also meets the requirements. Then maybe the filing has to be updated, I imagine, and then they proceed with the project in that manner.
So it's the responsible
there are further
design
challenges than that,
professional.
though. So that's really what the process generally is. My understanding of the process is that the architect is the arbiter of the compliance system per the requirements in the code, has to outline those requirements in the architectural drawings with the basic design system. And if, for example, a project had no combustible materials and a bidder comes with an alternative, maybe it's a value engineering alternative, and says, we would like to, instead of what you specified, I'd like to use this material, but it contains combustible materials, then that will trigger a bunch of requirements. I don't want to get into them, but probably a refiling, a post-approval amendment, documentation, et cetera. So
are you seeing any projects going forward that do not have the testing certification within the system assembly and an owner relying on them to complete the testing mid or post construction, or that's too much of a liability?
Doesn't always fit the schedule, Adrian. Meaning, right now.
Yeah, I've seen one.
Go ahead.
But that's it.
You're almost saying is, can we get project-specific testing to get a system through over the line? And one is the availability of laboratories, the uncertainty of whether these tests will pass on the first go or not. I don't have stats, and maybe this is part of the issue. No idea about stats on how many times it takes to test something before you get it to pass. We often only see the finished test report of the past assembly. And all of that on a project timeline is creates quite a challenge. And that challenge is hard to mitigate. That risk of delay is hard to mitigate.
So can I? So there's a bunch of things here. I mean, the fact that people are avoiding this part of the code, I think, is part of the issue, right? Is if it's so hard to comply with, why even write this into the code? But I think the thing I really want to hit on is the thing that you brought up, Dan, is this testing required with the fire blocking, which sounds like it's the right thing, but actually, we haven't. If you look at the way that some of the materials are required to test with, let's say, ASTM E84, where in the IBC they extended the test in some areas, they made some of the metrics more stringent in some areas, saying yes, you test the E84, but you only get to 10.5 feet for this, or you test the E84 and you do this for 30 minutes instead of 10 minutes. We didn't do that with NFPA 285 here. What we did is we said you have to meet exactly the same flame and heat requirements, but you have to add something in there which is probably going to improve your flame and heat performance. And so now we're actually allowing more combustible materials into our portfolio of products than we would have before, because now we can't tell the difference between something that needed fire blocking to pass the test before and something that didn't need fire blocking. And I think one of the best ways that we could have done this was just to tell people to add fire blocking to something that's already NFPA 285 tested, and that that would have solved at least this problem that I see. I mean, literally happening before my eyes.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, your experience is that manufacturers are going to materials that probably wouldn't have performed as a system as well without fire blocking, and then they're going to lean on the fire blocking to create the performance they need to pass the test, which otherwise they wouldn't have been enough. That's an interesting development.
It's definitely happening. And the reason why is because it's, some of these manufacturers who have, material that could pass NFPA 285 without it actually have cheaper material that wouldn't have been able to pass 285, and they're going to go with the cheaper material if they can get away with it, right? And that's, I don't know that that's about the scruples of the manufacturer. I think it's saying this is what New York State is requiring now, so let's go with what they're requiring, right?
Let me if I could shed a little bit of light as to the process that yielded these code changes. It was through a mediated event, meaning that different opinions were brought forward regarding these code changes. Some were more stringent, some were, from some people's perspective, more stringent, some from other people's perspective, more prescriptive or more following of the existing code, okay? All sorts of opinions were shared. In the end, no agreement was made, so the New York City, the building departments finalized this particular set of code changes. And my understanding is, and this is based on experience, not just with this mediated item, but other mediated items, is that the building department is going to follow the requirements of the code very stringently without interpretation. And so it is, because it is what it is. And I don't see this changing in this next code cycle. I don't think these requirements are, who knows what the future will lie. Maybe the only way likely this would change would be a city ordinance change. That's what I can foresee. So we deliver the rules we have and comply with them to use these materials in our exterior wall cavities in New York City.
Right, and then we go back to the last question of it, really, how do we comply with them, if we have to put fire blocking in? And I honestly, I've been working with the DOB since December of last year on an alternative fire blocking that's used in the rest of the world, but not not in the U.S. so much, for this type of application where you can have the ventilation and drainage, and then it activates during a fire. Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, you could have hinged situations, you could have all sorts of different ways to do this. This process is, I'll tell you, no one wants to go on the line at the DOB and say, I'm going to approve something new here when it comes to fire, right? Even after we went through the FDNY review and everything like that. And so it is a challenging process. So if you guys are designing things for your clients that's actually able to get them ventilation and drainage, that's great. I don't know what those details could be though.
Steve, maybe you could expand on the problem with the drainage. Is it happening around the window openings? Is it happening into slab blocking?
Yeah, I mean, so if you put, and Antoine from Rockwell, and I, co-authored a paper on the issues around this. He did some thermal modeling around putting flashing in between, continuous flashing in between these areas if we tried to do fire blocking like that. But really the issue is, we have to put, let's say we have to put 8 inches at the slab, which is what's prescribed for combustible materials, and then we have to put somewhere between 2 and 4 inches around the windows. It's not clear by the code, how thick we have to do that around the windows. Then how do we put something in there? Right now, mineral wool is the only material that can viably be constructed and is on that list of material that that's acceptable by the code, right? So if we're not talking about alternative materials that have to get approved by the commissioners, mineral wool is the only material that's really viable and constructible. So you're stuffing mineral wool tightly between the back wall and the back face of your cladding, right? And so then, even if the mineral wool drains for a little bit, at some point it's going to filter all the crap and stop draining, pretty quickly. And so, that's just not a viable solution for having drainage and ventilation behind your cladding. So somehow you have to then incorporate metal, which is not one of the acceptable materials, going out through the joint of your cladding wherever you need fire blocking, and then get the metal accepted, and also detail that in a way that doesn't affect your thermal performance of your wall system or your water management or all those things. And this is the real challenge when you're trying to design fire blocking into ventilated assembly.
So is there a mechanism to get something accepted, or does it not even exist yet?
Well, when I started trying to get these through, we were using forms that really didn't make sense to this. I mean, there's an OTCR process, but I've been trying to work my way through that since last December, when we did a year and a half of testing to prepare for the application in December. So we've been working on this for almost 3 years now, to prepare for it. And you go through the OTCR, then you go through the FDNY, then you go back to the OTCR, and then the commissioner has to sign off on it. And so I don't know what the end of that process looks like, because I haven't been to the end of it, but I'm hopefully pretty close.
Dan, are there any jurisdictions, either domestically or internationally, that seem to be farther ahead with this development than us?
Yeah, go to the UK. Read the code changes that they've acted since Grenfell in the United Kingdom, which took a much more stringent position on limitation, actually the banning of combustible materials within exterior walls above a certain height. The height is generally related to the height of the firefighter's ability to fight the fire in the exterior of buildings. Namely, the height of a ladder from a truck. The extended ladder from a truck.
Side rise on here that seem to be very well informed on the topic. And so can we learn anything from how they're implementing these rain screen systems or opaque elements on facades there?
I think there's quite a lot to be learned and shared. And frankly, I just came back from a conference last week in Munich with my colleagues over in Europe, and we had some interesting discussions on this point. And I'm looking to learn and transfer knowledge as the world reacts to a changing paradigm, meaning that our exterior walls have been primarily focused on air, water, thermal. And now fire has come to the forefront. And it's not an either or, it's an all, a holistic solution that tackles these requirements and finds a solution that works.
And it wasn't just Grenfell, right, Dan? I mean,
no, it's not just that. There's plenty of other fires. But the key thing is that I think that captured a lot of attention. It was a tragedy with loss of life, et cetera. And there have been other fires with loss of life, but the pinpoint there was definitely within the cavity of the exterior wall. And the final report was just issued 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. And so I've read through it, and it is quite enlightening. And one of the things that got enlightened by all of this is something that we're challenged with. We're practical consultants who spend a lot of time in the field actually building buildings. And we all know that exterior walls are built to a certain tolerances, but they're not like your watch tolerance. And when it comes to the actual test reports, they don't always inform us on the available tolerances to still have a compliant system. Whether it could be something as simple as cavity depth, thickness of insulation variations, shimming, all these sort of things which we know every single day occur on job sites. What maintains a compliant system from the respect of the fire test is a very large challenge that still faces us as an industry.
Yeah, the standards haven't been set, right? So if you're talking about NFPA 285, that cavity depth is a big one. How far can we go out? And no one answers that question, right? The fire engineers don't answer it. They're starting to try to answer it in the newest version. They have an addendum to the standard that starts to say specifically for ACM panels, you can get, I think, if you test to a certain amount, you can get a ½ inch lower than that. I forget. I might be wrong about that, but it's something regarding the tolerance of that cavity. But it's the very first one that we've seen in terms of trying to address that. But that is a challenge. But I would say that that's not our biggest challenge. And one of the things that we did great in New York City, and let me say this because I've been saying it to everybody, is requiring the special inspection, requiring the submittal of documents. That is not happening across the country, and that's something that we should absolutely be doing more of, because it's vital that we're transparent with what's been tested, what these manufacturers have in their books. Absolutely, we should force everyone to share those raw reports. So I think that's one of the ways that we really did great in this code change.
So can I ask you, would you be in favor that when a test of a system is done for NFPA 285, that not just a successful test, which is the basis for the final report, be shared, but also the lessons learned from attempts that didn't yield a successful test and the investigation thereof.
I think
I got my start in the aerospace industry.
yeah.
And the aerospace industry is a bit more collaborative. Actually, it's forced to be collaborative by FAA and the European regulations, that when something happens, the findings are shared. The requirements extend not just to a specific plane, but to all planes of a singular type. That type of sharing enables lessons learned. What I've in our industry, the facade industry, specific clients are commissioning these tests, and they own the data, and their ability or willingness to share that is often non-existent. And therefore, it's hard to know that if the cavity is slightly larger, it fails. But if it's slightly smaller, it passes. It only tells you one answer.
No, you're 100% right about that. And so what I would say is that there's I think there's a way to do that and anonymize the data where we can use it. And the Rain Screen Association, I'm vice chair of the Rain Screen Association, and we've been doing this for 5 years now. Had an attempt at trying to gather this sort of information. Even just gathering successful tests is difficult, but then going to saying, okay, can we register anonymous information into, and Intertech had an attempt at this for a while. There's been a bunch of attempts over the last 10 or 15 years at trying to create this database that we could then draw from. Our fire engineers could create some confidence in what they're doing in assessing these types of things. It hasn't happened yet, but I will tell you there's a want in the industry definitely from manufacturers to do it. It's just a question of how you do it.
Is it a technical obstacle or a commercial obstacle?
I think it's a process. I think so. So for example, you have, and I think it's the brick industry and the IMP industry. They share very sensitive data about their sales and all the and they're able to have that all washed in a central trusted location and then redistributed in an anonymous way, so everybody can help sort of learn about what's going on in the industry. I think that's the thing we don't have that we really need in this case.
I think that could be a key part of the solution to deal with the practical tolerance variations that we occur in the field. Assembly is only specific to assembly. How to adapt it to variation, how to adapt it to slightly different designs, and having informed professionals being able to make the correct engineering judgment, not using the official term for that, but the small e, small j, so that we are moving in the right direction, the safe direction that achieves all the performance requirements.
Well, I guess the ordering block.
That's the path. But the question is,
Eliot?
I guess I'm going to be ordering block pretty soon.
Yeah.
Two questions here. Well, let's pivot in a different direction. How does this impact existing buildings, and what is the path moving forward?
Good question. I don't know, Dan.
I'm looking at you, Dan.
I just see the whole screen. I would classify existing buildings as being sprinklered or unsprinkled. We've had local laws which have required the sprinkling of buildings, and the code addresses those which are unsprinkled. Without sprinklers, because the active fire suppression system does help, the requirements are much more stringent, but perhaps those are few and far between nowadays as we keep retrofitting buildings with sprinkler systems. But those without, we have to look at it because most of our work is existing building upgrade. And the line between substantial retrofit and slight modification, which is a different topic that mostly addresses on the energy code side, is a huge topic. The same kind of challenges exist with fire, especially when you're assessing what materials are already there and what are buried in the walls that may already be compostable that we're going to keep and perhaps expose. These are the challenges at hand.
I've gotten 2 calls about this in the last 2 weeks about existing building, whether they need to, and I don't have an answer for what's significant enough.
So my question would be, is there any means of sort of testing in situ or modeling to kind of verify an existing system or verify what conditions we're getting ourselves into?
Well, any type of reclad, overclad, repositioning of an existing buildings, there is always a level of investigation at the start of that project, which include gauging asbestos, learning structural capacity of what you're going to anchor to, understanding the conditions and materials from a degradation perspective. Can they exist within a buried wall assembly? Should they be removed, etc.? I think this has to parlay into exactly these type of requirements. The fire requirements will probably parlay into that, meaning that as part of that assessment, we're refocusing a bit more on the fire aspects of things. In terms of how do you assess that, it is a little bit more challenging because, as you know, most of these requirements are laboratory tests, while the materials are in sandwiches and whatever condition they are in on site, from whatever age the building happened to be in. And you know what's interesting? I foresee, and we've in the last few years, and I was just explaining one of our jobs that we've actually reclad a building twice in the span of my career. And when you go into a building that's been repositioned, the drawings, first of all, are very hard to, you can't find one set of drawings that shows you everything they need there, potentially. Secondly is the ages and the materials you find within the assemblies that are left over can be quite varied. And so this is what we're doing. We are trying to make sure our buildings last longer, which is highly sustainable as opposed to demolishing them and building new. I mean, sometimes it makes sense to build new. I'm a proponent of building new, helps them in business. But still, we are repositioning buildings, repositioning facades, putting new facades on existing buildings, and dealing with what's already there. And sometimes that's recent, sometimes that's old. And it is really challenging from all sorts of perspectives. Technically, commercially, meaning how do you assess the cost of a project, having a full understanding of the existing conditions. Reasonable understanding of the existing conditions through probing and the like.
There isn't going to be a prescriptive solution to it, no matter what. It's going to have to be a bespoke design for every one of these, like they are now.
I really wonder how the insurance industry will react to this. Meaning, will the drivers of this be the underlying insurance companies who need to insure the buildings thereafter? Factory Mutual and the like, so that we can understand the risk tolerance they're willing to take, and is that an appropriate risk tolerance for our design community to uphold? Do we have to go further, or is it reasonable? That's what I'm still always looking for when I get those kind of calls to say we have to have a call with our insurance arm and the risks and the end product on this. It's a very interesting discussion.
As these requirements become further developed, do you think there's going to be a different set of inevitably rules for existing versus new construction, kind of like how it applies for bird friendly?
I'll tell you this, I'm not going to touch bird friendly with a 10-foot pole at this stage, different podcast. But New York City has been talking about an existing building code for quite a long time. In some ways, my colleagues in my firm have been involved in developing that existing building code. ICC has an existing building code. And so we're not the only city that has old buildings. We're not the only city that is trying to reuse those buildings and use those buildings very effectively and improve their performance to be more sustainable. So what I'm really motivated by that is we don't need to tackle it like New York City. We do live in a dense urban environment. And we're not the only city that's dense, but New York City is quite dense. And taking those steps, getting those requirements between the new and the existing building, which I think can happen, will enable us to bifurcate our approaches appropriately and focus on one segment versus the other.
In the interim, do you think there's a sense of urgency, just given the, call it, lack of use of some existing buildings, and maybe to respark the economy, driving construction activity, driving rental income growth for owners and leasing, and then driving an initiative to head towards our sustainability and energy code goals? Do you think the existing building topic gets a little sticky on how to balance all these factors?
I think you can have a whole segment on office to residential conversion, and you can talk about on a larger scale how the government, how the regulations have to be enacted to enable that marketplace to truly flourish, because there's a need on the residential side. And frankly, we in some segments of the commercial market, not necessarily the top end, but within a certain segment, there's vacant space that could be repurposed. I do not know if the fire question will be the most pertinent issue. I believe there are other requirements which are a lot more sticky, to use your word, that I think if we solve those, we can find appropriate solutions. When it comes to the energy code, what's interesting is the building code also is enabling, the zoning codes are enabling the movement of the face of the facade further into the right of way of the streets. Not over the neighbors, because you have to respect your neighbors, but into the street, where when we reclad buildings, we used to have a 4-inch rule. I'm just going to use that word, but it's somewhere there in the code, but there's a 4-inch rule that now is less cut and dry. And so we can go further into, by expanding the thicknesses of our walls outward into the street, we can enable solutions within the exterior wall that are highly thermally performing and highly performing. And that's a positive step. And we need more of those positive steps, because we need to be a city of yes.
I asked that question because I think there's two examples. A, in a historic preservation application, at times when energy code you might be energy code exempt, just to preserve the existing architecture. And then B, I overheard or was listening to a facade consultant in Boston talk about how the new stretch code just it's not feasible to meet in some of the existing buildings. So it may be either making some of these upgrades or deep energy retrofits technically prohibitive. So I really asked that question to spark the conversation of if you think exceptions or quicker revisions might be made for the code requirements for existing buildings, just given the urgency. And from what you say with moving the facade in and out, it sounds like that's an ongoing conversation.
I think it's definitely, we've learned a lot of what's happened in Massachusetts with the stretch code and how it's impacted the general marketplace there. Although there are changes, it's not permanent. Okay, there is an adaptation. You mentioned earlier about, and Stephen mentioned materials that are coming online and solutions that are coming online and the reaction of the industry. And with the right encouragement, with a properly drafted legislation, there will be a reaction. I think we'll find our way through. We will find the holistic solutions. They may not, in the interim, we could see pickups, starts and stops, or slowdowns in the economy in certain segments due to this. But I truly believe that there is enough talent in the industry, enough commercial incentive within certain stakeholders to find appropriate solutions to our issues. The right legislation does enable it, does speed it up, and that's important. If timing is important, which it is, then that's going to be a critical component.
So I'll tell you,
But
Dan, I think you're. Let me say first. Let me say before I say the disparaging part. Let me say first. I think you're right about that. But I also what you just said really mimics a lot of literally almost word for word sometimes the responses I've gotten from the folks at the DOB when I say, hey, there's challenges here that we can't get over. Like, how do we set up an NFPA 285 to to this standard, right? If I just put the 100 square foot box, it covers all your all your measurement equipment, right? Yeah, your thermocouples, and then if I'm not doing it the same way that my other products are doing it, how do you compare? And the answers to questions that I think are relatively straightforward. Hey, we missed language on how to comply with this. I'm getting a lot of these responses from the DOB saying, we trust the industry is going to figure it out. And it leaves me just like, I get to see what's happening in the industry, and people sticking their head in their sand and hoping folks don't read the language before the permitting gets approved and all this stuff. And, I'm just looking for ways to tell my clients, hey, there's a path to compliance. And if I can't tell them there's a path to compliance, well, obviously folks are going to try to get around it to sell material. And then I get, I voice this to the DOB and I get these responses like, we trust the industry will figure it out. And
all of this is just leading to where we are. We're not at the end of the movie.
Yes.
Maybe in the challenging part of the movie where we're hoping that the hero finds the way through, and so we can have a successful outcome. But maybe I'm always an optimist, and I've been in this industry for 25 years, and I've seen solutions come up that we can all be proud of, that we all feel is appropriate, that pushes our industry forward. And I feel like some of the tragedies that have occurred are complete. There are responsible parties, but as an industry, we have nothing to be proud of when we see what's happened in some of these buildings. And the fact is, I am most encouraged that our part of the industry on this side of the pond, as they call it, is trying to be proactive, not reactive, not waiting for our own version of this tragedy to occur before we do something, which frankly is often the spur for change. Now, we don't always get it right the first time. I'll give you that. But we need to move this thing forward because I think the focus on this is not ill-placed. And that's a personal opinion.
On a final note, let me ask this, Dan, to end on you. I think this is an area, a very gray area that some designers or people in the industry listening might have a lot of confusion around or might want to engage. So what do you think the best means of finding more information or getting more involved in this topic are? I think a massive problem in our industry is the lack of continuous education to the public and to the industry. So how would you recommend the design community or contractors get more engaged on this topic?
I think if they mimic, to to touch with the pole that I thought I wouldn't hold. I think if you mimic what we've done with bird-friendly glass, how the industry has come together to address specific topics in New York City on bird-friendly glass in a similar manner for this issue. So it's not just a few of us. And Stephen, I put you in that little bucket of a few of us highly focused on this issue.
Right.
I think that would be education is a big part of it. The role of industry groups, okay? The role of standard developers, maybe be within NFPA, beyond NFPA, could have a role to play in establishing a standard that, or establishing, and this could be practices as opposed to standard, meaning not the rules, but how to comply, that will find widespread adoption, sound technical footing, and be a means forward. And then through that, our general design community can be educated, our owners can be educated, and while it's turbulent now, these waters can be smoothed, and we have viable paths forward. So education is a key part, the industry has a key part, but as I started with, that I have clients who are just avoiding the issue, that is a disincentive to, why should I learn more about something that I don't even plan on using, or my firm has decided we are, in all cases, wherever possible, avoiding. That's an impediment to that type of development.
But I think that's an inevitable fact that's going to happen when it's the designer of record that's making the final determination. And they really don't have any of the education, guidance, standards to go by yet. We're really saying, unless I'm misunderstanding what we've been talking about for the last half hour, it's really on them to interpret the law and make the final determination as the responsible designer of record. And I can't blame them for saying, just go brick, because it's scary to make a mistake on this when there isn't much to fall back on and say, those 5 were done this way, they passed through plan examination, they're up on the wall, they have insurance. It's, honestly, we still have compliance and enforcement issues with the code that we've had for 6 and 8 years already, and can't get, proper education and enforcement yet. Yeah, bird-friendly glass, it's happening. Is it always compliant? I don't know. That's a discussion we have a lot, whether or not everyone's complying with the actual requirements of the law. We're seeing bird-friendly glass on a submittal. Is it the correct bird-friendly glass? Is it in the correct places on the building? That we don't know.
Yeah, Eliot, I think you really nailed it. That a responsible party, and this is something our society and maybe our industry here on this side of the pond does well. We delineate responsibility. What the architect's responsible for, what the contractor's responsible for, what the testing agent's responsible for, what the owner's responsible for. And this building code really makes clear the architect's role in specifying the products and systems in their building, and ultimately take the responsibility that those are complying with the requirements. And that is where the rubber hits the road.
Absolutely.
And I've always loved to ask an architect who is embarking on this, how many fire tests have they seen? How many times have they visited a laboratory and seen a test? What is their experience level with this knowledge base? And of course, it's always minor or small or maybe anecdotal, not widespread. I mean, I'm a consultant. People hire me because I see a lot of buildings, I touch a lot of buildings, I work in a lot of scenarios, I see things done in many different ways. You do that because back in the day, curtain walls were not done by curtain wall consultants. They were drawn by architects and provided by contractors, and there were issues. And then consultant industry, expert subject matter expert, to wrap this up, Adrian, was created around that because we needed more expertise. Right? Fire engineers, specifically fire engineers with facade experience, are going to be in high demand, my prediction, as we navigate these waters.
So
and
if
we get smarter, and we get smarter, we educate, we move forward knowingly, not unknowingly, about the materials we're using and how we're using them. The rules, I'm sure, will not always be the same. They will evolve over time, through legislation, etc. We will move to a safer world. And I tell you, that safety is very, it's at the heart of why we have a building code, why we started with it. And it brought to the fact that we have to be cognizant of it's holistic solutions like safety, energy performance, the green world, and the like, that all have to be taken into account together.
Well said. Thank you guys for hopping on. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Adrian, thank you,
Thanks,
Stephen. Thank you, Eliot. Take care.
Thanks, guys.